My boyfriend said, "If you trust me, give me access to your bank account." I smiled and said, "You're right about sharing." Then I sent him an invoice for $15,700, his half of every date, trip, hotel, and vacation I'd paid for over the last 2 years. His lawyer threatened legal action. My attorney responded with receipts. My name is Claire Bennett. I'm 33 years old, and I'm a software engineer. For most of my adult life, I thought I was the kind of woman who could spot red flags early. I had been careful with my career, careful with money, careful with people. I wasn't naive, at least that was what I liked to believe. Ryan Carter proved me wrong. The thing about manipulation is that it rarely arrives looking like manipulation. It doesn't always come with shouting or obvious cruelty. Sometimes it looks like comfort. Sometimes it sounds reasonable. Sometimes it sits across from you at brunch, smiling over a mimosa, speaking in the same warm voice you've trusted for 2 years. Ryan was 30. He was funny, charming, and easy to like in that effortless way that made strangers open up to him within minutes. We didn't live together, but we spent most weekends at each other's places. He had his apartment, I had mine, and for a long time, that arrangement felt healthy, independent, but serious. If anyone had asked me a month earlier whether I saw a future with him, I would have said yes. Looking back, there were signs I should have paid closer attention to. Ryan forgot his wallet more often than anyone I knew. Not every time, not enough to make it obvious, just often enough that I stopped noticing. A waiter would bring the check. Ryan would pat his pockets and give me that sheepish little grin. "Oh, damn, I left it in my other jacket." And I'd cover it. When we took weekend trips, he was always excited to plan them. He picked the hotel, chose the restaurants, sent me links to things we should do. Somehow, when it was time to pay, my card ended up handling most of it. I told myself it didn't matter. I made more than he did, and relationships weren't supposed to feel like scoreboards. That was the excuse I used for 2 years. Then came the brunch. We were at a restaurant downtown that Ryan loved, the kind of place with white marble tables, overpriced coffee, and sunlight pouring through tall windows. It was a normal Sunday. People were talking around us, silverware clinking, servers weaving between tables with trays of drinks. Ryan had been telling me some story about a coworker, and I was halfway through my omelet when he said, almost casually, "I've been thinking." I glanced up. Dangerous. He laughed, but the laugh felt a little practiced. "No, seriously," he said. "I think we should combine our bank accounts." I stared at him, fork still in my hand. "What?" "Fully combine them," he said, leaning back as if he had just suggested switching phone plans instead of merging our finances. "Real couples share everything." I set my fork down slowly. "Ryan, we aren't married." "You don't need a marriage certificate to be committed." I didn't say we did. "So what's the problem?" The way he asked it bothered me. He didn't sound curious. He sounded like he had already decided my hesitation meant something bad about me. I kept my voice even. "There isn't a problem. I just think merging bank accounts is a huge step. We've been together 2 years." "I know. Then what are we waiting for?" I looked at him for a second, trying to understand where this sudden urgency was coming from. Maybe living together first. Maybe being engaged. Something more concrete than dating and spending weekends together. His expression cooled almost immediately. "So you don't see a future with me?" "That's not what I said." "It's exactly what you're saying." "No, it isn't." "Then prove it," he said. The words landed harder than they should have. He leaned forward, eyes fixed on mine. "If you trust me, give me access." The word lingered in my head. Access. Not partnership, not commitment, access. I thought about a joke he'd made 3 weeks earlier while we were looking at apartments online. One listing was ridiculously expensive, and I had laughed and said, "Who can afford that?" Ryan had pointed at me and said, "You can." He laughed afterward, so I laughed too. But sitting across from him at brunch, watching the expectation in his face, the joke didn't feel like a joke anymore. I studied him properly then, the impatience in his jaw, the way his smile kept returning whenever he thought I was close to agreeing, the certainty that my answer should eventually become yes if he pushed hard enough. Something settled in me. "You know what?" I said. His face brightened. "What?" "You're right." He sat up a little. "I am? Couples should share things equally." The relief that moved across his face was so immediate that I almost felt embarrassed for not seeing it sooner. He didn't look touched. He didn't look moved. He looked relieved. "Exactly," he said. I nodded. "Then that's what we'll do." He reached for his coffee, thinking the conversation had gone his way. I let him think that. I even smiled when he changed the subject. But while Ryan finished his brunch like a man who had won, I was already thinking about bank statements, old receipts, vacation charges, dinners, Tickets, hotels, every "I'll get the next one" that had quietly disappeared over the past 2 years. By the time I dropped him off and drove home, I knew exactly what I was going to do. That afternoon, I opened my laptop at the dining table and pulled up my banking app. At first, I told myself I was only proving a point. I would look through a few transactions, make a rough estimate, and maybe Ryan would understand how ridiculous his version of sharing sounded once the numbers were in front of him. 15 minutes turned into an hour. An hour turned into the entire evening. The pattern was worse than I expected. There was the coastal resort trip Ryan had suggested the previous summer. He chose the hotel, picked the restaurants, planned the activities, and I paid for nearly all of it. There was the music festival weekend, the cabin in the mountains, the baseball game, the anniversary dinner, the concert tickets, the steakhouse he loved, and the grocery runs for the weekends he stayed at my apartment. Every transaction led me to another memory, another dinner, another weekend, another moment where he had promised to get the next one and somehow never did. By midnight, I had a spreadsheet in front of me with dates, locations, amounts, and categories for every shared expense I could verify. I removed gifts completely. Birthdays, Christmas, Valentine's Day, random surprises, anything I had chosen to give freely. It all came off the list. If I was going to make a point, I wanted it clean. The final number still made me sit back in my chair. $15,700. Ryan's half. I stared at the screen for a long time, not because I expected him to pay it, but because the number made the imbalance impossible to ignore. For 2 years, I had treated my generosity like love. Ryan had treated it like a system. The next morning, I turned the spreadsheet into a proper invoice. It was organized, itemized, and painfully fair. At the top, I wrote, "Per your request regarding shared financial participation, here is a breakdown of shared relationship expenses over the past 2 years. Looking forward to creating financial equality." I read it twice, took a breath, and sent it to Ryan's email. His call came less than a minute later. "Claire, what the hell is this? The invoice? You actually sent it? You asked for equality. This is insane. Why? You can't charge your boyfriend for dates." I leaned back in my chair. "Yesterday, you said couples should share everything." "That's not what I meant." "Of course it wasn't." "What did you mean then?" He didn't answer right away. I could hear him breathing through the phone, searching for a version of his argument that didn't sound exactly like what it was. Finally, he said, "You paid because you wanted to." "Did I?" "Yes." "Who suggested the beach trip, Ryan?" Silence. "Who chose the hotel?" More silence. "Who picked the restaurants?" "That's not the point." "It is the point." His voice sharpened. "That's what girlfriends do. They take care of their boyfriend sometimes." I almost laughed, but there was nothing funny about it anymore. "So when you said sharing, you meant sharing my money?" "You're twisting this." "No," I said. "I'm finally hearing you clearly." The call went downhill after that. Ryan called me petty, immature, vindictive. I told him he wanted rules that only applied when they benefited him. Neither of us screamed, which somehow made the argument colder. By the end, his voice had dropped into that wounded tone people use when they want to make you feel cruel for having a boundary. "I can't believe you'd do this to someone you love," he said. I looked at the invoice still open on my laptop and quietly replied, I was starting to wonder the same thing. After that, Ryan disappeared for a week. No calls, no texts, no apology, no real attempt to talk. At first, I expected another argument. Then I expected him to come around and admit the bank account request had been too much. Instead, the silence stretched long enough to feel deliberate, like he was preparing something. A week later, I came home from work and found a certified letter in my mailbox. The return address belonged to a law firm. I carried it upstairs, set it on my kitchen counter, and stared at it for a full minute before opening it. Ryan had hired an attorney. According to the letter, I had committed financial coercion, emotional abuse, harassment, and attempted extortion. It claimed the invoice was an intimidation tactic designed to cause severe emotional distress. It demanded that I withdraw it immediately, issue a written apology, stop all contact, and agree to mediation regarding my so-called abusive behavior. If I refused, they threatened a restraining order and a lawsuit. I read it once, then again. By the third time, the shock had worn off enough for anger to move in. Ryan had asked for access to my bank account. Ryan had pushed the idea of financial equality. Ryan had started the entire conversation. Yet somehow, on paper, I was now the predator. That scared me more than the legal language. A person who argues with you is one thing. A person who rewrites reality and sends it through a lawyer is something else entirely. The next morning, I called an attorney. Her name was Rebecca Walsh. She was in her early 60s with silver hair cut just above her shoulders and the calm expression of someone who had spent decades listening to people lie badly. I handed her the letter, the invoice, and the text messages. She read quietly for nearly half an hour while I sat across from her, trying not to twist my hands in my lap. When she finally looked up, she removed her glasses. "Did you ever threaten him?" "No." "Did you ever say you expected him to actually pay this?" "It started as a response to his demand for financial equality. I wanted him to understand what equal would look like." Rebecca nodded. "This letter is meant to scare you." "So there's no case?" "There's always a case if someone wants to spend enough money," she said. "But a good case? No." I felt my shoulders drop for the first time in days. "What bothers me," she continued, tapping the letter, "is the escalation. Normal couples argue. They talk, break up, cool off, whatever. Your boyfriend jumped straight to legal threats after you refused him access to your finances." Hearing it laid out, that plainly made my stomach tighten. Rebecca drafted a response that same week. It was calm, professional, and backed by evidence. Screenshots of Ryan asking for financial access, messages about sharing everything equally, proof that the invoice excluded gifts, and a clear warning that if he continued making baseless claims, we would defend aggressively. "If his attorney is competent," Rebecca said after reviewing the final draft, "this should end here." I wanted to believe her. But the legal letter was only the first move. A few days later, a mutual friend named Amanda texted me. "Is everything okay?" I stared at the message for a moment before replying. "Depends on why you're asking." Her answer came several minutes later. "Ryan says you've been demanding money from him." I called her immediately. "What exactly has Ryan been telling people?" I asked. Amanda hesitated, and that hesitation told me enough. "He says you tracked every dollar you ever spent on him," she said carefully. "He says you sent him a bill and threatened legal action." It was the kind of lie that protects itself by using pieces of the truth. Yes, I had sent an invoice. Yes, legal letters were now involved. What Ryan left out was the part where he had demanded access to my money first. I sent Amanda screenshots. 10 minutes later, she replied with one word. "Oh." Over the next week, more people reached out. Some asked questions. Others had already decided I was the villain. One woman accused me of emotionally abusing Ryan. Another told me I needed help. Each time, I sent the same screenshots and watched the conversation shift from judgment to silence. Then Ryan's sister called. Emily Carter had always been direct. We weren't close, but I liked her. She had a steadiness Ryan didn't, a way of listening without performing concern. "Claire," she said when I answered, "can we talk?" I told her everything. The brunch, the bank account request, the invoice, the legal letter, the rumors. She barely interrupted. When I finished, there was a long pause. "He told us a very different story," she said. "What story?" "That you were demanding repayment for gifts, birthday presents, Christmas, Valentine's Day." I closed my eyes. Of course, that was the version he chose. It made me sound cruel instead of cornered. "I excluded all gifts," I said. "I can send you the invoice." I emailed it to her while we were still on the phone. A few minutes later, she exhaled. "Wow. Yeah, he left out a lot. He left out the part that mattered." Emily went quiet again. When she spoke, her voice was lower. "Claire, I don't think this was ever about equality." "I know." "No, I mean something else." I sat up straighter. "Ryan is drowning in debt," she said. The room seemed to shrink around me. "What?" "He doesn't know I know," Emily said. "A few months ago, our parents asked me to help them sort through some financial paperwork. That's when I realized how bad things had gotten." I didn't say anything. Suddenly, the expensive apartment jokes, the pressure, the sudden urgency, the way he framed access as love. It all rearranged itself in my mind. Suddenly, a lot of things made sense. The pressure about combining finances, the apartment conversations, the urgency. Instead of wondering whether Ryan wanted access to my money, I found myself wondering how long he'd needed it. That was when I understood the worst part of the story hadn't even started yet. For a little while, I convinced myself Emily's revelation would be the thing that finally brought everything back to reality. Not because I expected Ryan to wake up one morning and suddenly become honest, but because lies become harder to maintain the more people know the truth. Eventually, contradictions pile up. Eventually, someone asks the wrong question. Eventually, the story falls apart. At least that's what I thought. Rebecca's response letter went out exactly as planned. Every accusation from Ryan's attorney was answered with evidence. Screenshots showed Ryan asking for access to my finances. Messages showed him arguing that serious couples should share everything. The invoice itself proved that I had excluded gifts, holidays, and anything that had been freely given. A week later, his attorney responded with a short email. Their client would not be pursuing further legal action. That was it. No apology. No explanation. Just a quiet retreat. When Rebecca forwarded the email, she added a note underneath. Expected outcome. I remember staring at those two words and feeling strangely empty. For her, it was a routine legal victory. For me, it was the latest chapter in a relationship that had somehow transformed from weekend trips and lazy Sunday mornings into threats, accusations, and attorneys. I wanted it to be over. I wanted Ryan out of my life. I wanted to stop thinking about spreadsheets and screenshots. For about 10 days, I thought I was getting exactly that. Then Ryan discovered social media. It started with vague posts, nothing that mentioned me by name. Nothing specific enough to create legal problems. Just emotional paragraphs about toxic relationships, financial abuse, and manipulative exes. A few mutual friends liked them. Then more appeared. And more. Each post revealed a little more of the story, while conveniently leaving out the details that actually mattered. Within a week, people were contacting me again. Except now they weren't asking questions. They were giving opinions. One message said, "I never thought you'd be that kind of person." Another said, "Money isn't everything, Claire." One woman compared me to her emotionally abusive father. That one actually made me laugh. Not because it was funny. It was just amazing how confidently people judge situations they barely understood. For a while, I tried explaining. Then I stopped. Most people who genuinely want the truth start by asking questions. People who already believe a story aren't looking for answers. They're looking for confirmation. Ryan understood that better than anyone. One Friday afternoon, my brother Nathan called. The second I answered, I knew he'd seen something online. "Please tell me this disaster isn't about you." I laughed. "Unfortunately, it is." After I explained everything, he went quiet. Finally, he sighed. "I understand why you sent the invoice." That doesn't sound very enthusiastic. It isn't. I smiled despite myself. Nathan continued. "Claire, from the outside, it looks terrible." He wasn't wrong. A woman sending her boyfriend an invoice sounds ridiculous if you remove all context. That's what made Ryan's version so effective. Most people never get past the headline. They hear invoice and immediately stop listening. The details only matter if someone sticks around long enough to hear them. Social media isn't built for details. It's built for outrage. The person who finally changed the direction of everything wasn't me. It was Emily. About a week after Ryan's post started spreading, she made one of her own. She never mentioned Ryan. She never mentioned me. She never referenced the invoice. But everyone in our circle knew exactly who she was talking about. Her post focused on accountability, on people who demanded equality only when it benefited them. One sentence spread faster than the rest. If you ask for financial equality, don't be shocked when someone calculates what equality actually looks like. The internet didn't understand the reference. Our friends did. Ryan definitely did. Within hours, family members were arguing publicly. Relatives got involved. Old grudges surfaced. Apparently, Emily had spent years watching Ryan borrow money, avoid responsibility, and expect other people to clean up his mistakes. My situation wasn't unique. It was simply the first time someone had refused. That evening, she called me. "You didn't have to do that." "I know." "Then why did you?" She was quiet for a moment. "Because this isn't the first time." My stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" "He pulled something similar with his ex-girlfriend." I sat up immediately. "What?" "Not exactly the same situation, but the pattern was familiar." She paused. "Ryan has a habit of turning people into solutions." The sentence stayed with me, because the more I thought about it, the more accurate it felt. Ryan didn't solve problems. He found people who could solve them for him. Then he treated their help as something he deserved. A few days later, he made the mistake that destroyed his entire narrative. He posted part of my invoice online, not the entire document, just the final number, $15,700. Underneath it, he wrote, "This is what my ex says I owe her for being her boyfriend. Share this so people understand what emotional abuse looks like." The post exploded. Thousands of shares, hundreds of comments. People were furious. By the next morning, blogs had picked it up. My phone became unusable. Messages, calls, notifications, screenshots, strangers discussing my character as if they'd known me for years. That was the first moment I genuinely felt overwhelmed. Not because people were criticizing me, because Ryan had pushed the story beyond our personal lives. This wasn't gossip anymore. It was public, permanent, and reputations are much harder to repair than most people realize. That afternoon, Rebecca called. Her tone immediately caught my attention. "Have you seen the post?" "Unfortunately." "Good." I frowned. "Good? Because now we have a real case." I sat up straighter. "What do you mean?" "He publicly accused you of abuse while intentionally omitting information that completely changes the story." I stared out my apartment window. For weeks, I'd been defending myself, explaining, correcting, responding. Now Rebecca was talking about consequences. Real ones. Ryan had spent months trying to convince everyone he was the victim. He didn't realize that the evidence proving otherwise was about to become public. Rebecca gave Ryan one final opportunity to correct the record. Instead, he posted the cease and desist letter online and claimed I was trying to silence him. That decision ended any realistic chance of resolving the situation privately. 2 days later, the lawsuit was filed. And once the evidence became public, Ryan's story started collapsing faster than I ever imagined. The lawsuit was filed on a Wednesday. I expected it to drag on for months before anything meaningful happened. What I didn't expect was how quickly the public narrative began to shift once people had access to the full story instead of Ryan's carefully edited version. At first, only a handful of people read the filing. Then screenshots started circulating. Someone posted excerpts online. Someone else shared the text messages. Before long, people were reading the actual documents instead of reacting to Ryan's captions. The difference was immediate. For weeks, the conversation had been built around one question. Why would a woman send her boyfriend an invoice? Now people were asking a different question. Why was Ryan demanding access to her money in the first place? The same screenshots he'd spent months trying to bury suddenly became impossible to ignore. People saw him pushing for shared finances. They saw him insisting that serious couples should share everything. They saw that the invoice excluded gifts and holidays. They saw that the entire conflict began after I refused to give him access to my accounts. The internet had spent months treating Ryan like a victim. Now it was pulling apart his story piece by piece. I didn't need to argue. The evidence did it for me. One comment went viral almost overnight. Wait, he asked for access to her money first? Another followed. So equality only mattered when he benefited from it? Then another. This isn't financial abuse. This is someone getting called out on his own logic. For the first time in months, I stopped waking up with that constant knot in my stomach. Not because everything was fixed, because reality was finally catching up. Ryan reacted exactly how you'd expect. First, he deleted a few posts, then more, then entire accounts disappeared. Within a couple of days, years of content vanished from the internet. Unfortunately for him, screenshots are forever. The story had already escaped his control. There was no putting it back. A week later, one of our mutual friends called. Have you heard? Heard what? His company knows. I closed my eyes. Of course they did. Anything that becomes public enough eventually reaches employers. Apparently, someone had forwarded the lawsuit and supporting documents to human resources. Ryan wasn't fired, at least not as far as anyone knew. But he was being called into meetings. Questions were being asked. His professional reputation suddenly mattered. The same way mine had mattered when he was publicly attacking me. I won't pretend I celebrated. Despite everything, I didn't wake up hoping his life would collapse. What I wanted was accountability. Nothing more, nothing less. Over the following weeks, something else started happening. People began apologizing. Not everyone. Some quietly disappeared. Others pretended they'd never taken sides. But a surprising number reached out. Amanda was one of the first. I owe you an apology. You really don't. Actually, I do. Her voice sounded genuinely embarrassed. I believed him. I understood why. That was the frustrating part. Ryan had always been likable. Manipulative people rarely look manipulative from the outside. If they did, nobody would trust them. Amanda sighed. I should have asked more questions. Probably. I'm sorry, Claire. After we hung up, I sat on my couch for a while thinking about that conversation. It wasn't the apology itself that mattered. It was the acknowledgement. For months, I'd felt like I was screaming facts into a storm of opinions. Now people were finally listening. Others followed. Friends, acquaintances, even a few people who had publicly criticized me online. Not everyone apologized directly, but enough did that I knew the truth had reached them. About 6 weeks after the lawsuit was filed, Rebecca called again. This time there was amusement in her voice. They want to settle. I sat up immediately. Already? They've reviewed the evidence. What are they offering? Rebecca read through the proposal. A public apology. A public retraction. Full reimbursement of my legal fees. A non-disparagement agreement. Permanent dismissal of the case afterward. I listened quietly. No giant financial payout. No dramatic courtroom showdown. No revenge fantasy. Just accountability. Exactly what I'd wanted from the beginning. When Rebecca finished, she asked, "What do you think?" I looked out across the city from my balcony. "I think I'm tired." She laughed. That's a very good sign. A few weeks later, the apology appeared. I was standing in line at a coffee shop when my phone started vibrating nonstop. Rebecca, Emily, Amanda, Nathan, several friends, all within minutes. I stepped out of line and opened Rebecca's message. It's posted. I clicked the link. Ryan had created a new account just for the statement. No photos, no personal updates, nothing except a block of text. The first sentence stopped me cold. Over the past several months, I made public statements about my former girlfriend, Claire Bennett, that were false and misleading. I read it twice, then again. Not because I didn't understand it, because I never honestly believed I'd see those words. The statement acknowledged everything. That Ryan had requested access to my finances. That he had framed it as equality. That he had omitted key facts when speaking publicly. That I had not financially abused him. That his accusations had unfairly damaged my reputation. Most importantly, he apologized. For the first time since this started, Ryan wasn't defending himself or rewriting events. He was simply apologizing. When I finished reading, I felt something unexpected. Relief, not triumph. Not satisfaction, just relief. For months, I'd carried around this constant pressure, knowing strangers were forming opinions about me based on a version of events that wasn't true. That weight finally disappeared. The settlement was finalized later that week. Ryan paid my legal expenses. The paperwork was signed. The lawsuit was dismissed. Legally, everything was over. Emotionally, took a little longer. Because that's the part nobody talks about. When someone betrays your trust, an apology doesn't erase what happened. You still remember. You still replay conversations. You still wonder which moments were real and which ones weren't. For a while, I found myself revisiting the entire relationship. Vacations, arguments, promises. Things I used to remember fondly suddenly looked different. Therapy helped more than I expected. One day, my therapist asked a question that stayed with me. If you had known on your first date exactly how this relationship would end, would you still have dated him? My immediate answer was no. Then I thought about it, really thought about it, and changed my mind. Actually, yes. She looked surprised. Why? Because I regret what happened, but I don't regret learning who I became afterward. The relationship taught me things I probably wouldn't have learned any other way. It taught me the difference between generosity and obligation. It taught me the importance of boundaries. It taught me that protecting yourself isn't selfish. Most importantly, it taught me that healthy relationships require mutual responsibility. Without that, generosity eventually turns into exploitation. Several months after the settlement, Emily called. By then, we'd become genuine friends. One of the strangest outcomes of the entire situation. During the conversation, she casually mentioned something. Ryan moved. Moved where? Back to our hometown. Apparently, the attention had become too much. Friends knew. Family knew. Co-workers knew. The story followed him farther than he expected. How's he doing? I asked. Emily laughed softly. I honestly have no idea. And that was the truth. I had stopped keeping track of Ryan's life months earlier. Not because I forgave him. Because I stopped caring. There's a difference. Forgiveness is about them. Moving on is about you. Around that same time, I started dating again. Slowly. Carefully. I wasn't interested in rushing into anything. One evening, I met a man named Daniel through mutual friends. He taught high school physics. He was funny without trying too hard and confident without making it his entire personality. Dinner lasted nearly 3 hours. The conversation flowed so naturally that neither of us noticed how late it had gotten. Then the check arrived. Daniel reached for it. I reached too. We can split it. He looked surprised. You sure? Absolutely. A grin appeared on his face. Most women let me pay. I laughed. Most women don't have spreadsheet trauma. The confused look he gave me was worth the explanation. I told him the short version. A very short version. Nobody wants to hear an 8-month legal saga on a first date. By the end, he was laughing so hard he nearly spilled his drink. I think that might be the most expensive lesson in relationship history. Probably. Daniel and I didn't become some epic love story. But that dinner mattered because it reminded me that trust wasn't gone forever. One bad relationship didn't have to define every relationship that came after it. Several months later, I attended a college friend's wedding. Halfway through the reception, I saw Ryan standing across the room. The first time I'd seen him in nearly a year. He noticed me at almost the same moment. For a second, our eyes met. Neither of us smiled. Neither of us waved. Then he looked away. And that was it. No confrontation. No dramatic speech. No movie ending. Just two people who had once imagined a future together standing in the same room and realizing those lives now belonged to someone else. The strangest part was how little I felt. No anger. No resentment. No sadness. Nothing. And that was when I knew I was finally free. Later that night, while everyone else danced, I found myself thinking about the brunch that started everything. Back then, I thought the story was about money. I was wrong. Money was simply the thing that exposed everything else. The entitlement. The manipulation. The dishonesty. It didn't create those qualities. It revealed them. Looking back, the most valuable thing I recovered wasn't my reputation. It wasn't the legal fees. It wasn't even proving I was right. It was clarity. The ability to recognize the difference between a partner and someone looking for a sponsor. I learned that love and access are not the same thing. One is built on trust, while the other is built on entitlement. Ryan thought the most valuable thing I had was the money in my accounts. He was wrong. The most valuable thing I had was the ability to walk away the moment someone showed me who they really were. And that lesson was worth far more than $15,700.